Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're calling from. My name is Dan Flynn. I'm calling from Brussels, Belgium. I minister at Westminster Meeting in London, and I am engaged in various activities in England. I'm a trustee for the Quaker Action on Alcohol and Drugs, British charity and special interest group of Britain Yearly Meeting. And I'm a tutor for Woodbrook and a meeting for worship facilitator for Woodbrook, and of course, a member of QUIP and Quaker Universalist Group. It's my pleasure to present to you our two speakers today, Becky Birtha and Emma Condori Mamani. Becky is a member of the Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, and an American poet, short story writer, and children's author, best known for her works depicting African American and lesbian relationships. In recent years, she has written two children's historical fiction books about the African American experience, and a third about the experience of having a parent in jail or prison. Now, let's move my column here so I can scroll down a little bit. Emma Condori Mamani is a friend from Santidad Holiness Friends Yearly Meeting in Bolivia. A graduate of Earlham School of Religion, a member of the editorial board of QUIP publication Spirit Rising, Young Quaker Voices. She is the author of the book Quakers in Bolivia, The Early History of Bolivian Friends, and she is one of the contributors of the book The Quaker World. Becky and Emma will speak for 5 to 7 minutes each on today's theme, Who's Writing Whose Stories? After they speak, there will be an open discussion for all to share. I suggest 3 guidelines before we start. Let us follow worship sharing and pause after each participant who chooses to do so shares. Raise your hand if you want to share, and I will call on you. 2, let us follow the guidance in the introduction to advices and queries in Britain, Ireland, France, and German yearly meetings, and certainly others. Our diversity invites us both to speak what we know to be true in our lives and to learn from others. 3, let us accept without comment what others say because it's true for them, and work towards taking responsibility for what we share rather than giving advice to others. So now I invite Becky to, before we pose the questions for discussion, Becky to share for 5 to 7 minutes. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. I am happy to be back among QUIP folks. And this was a big question. Who's telling whose stories? Who's writing whose stories? So I thought that I would just share a few scenarios that kind of address the question, even though they may not answer it. I'm going to start with a poem that I wrote, and the poem is in the voice of a child. The child's name and the name of the poem is Taekwon. Ms. Schuster marked our book reports. I got an A. The baby started walking just yesterday. The Vectors won our second game thanks to my play. I scooped that baseball from the sky right by the wall. I really wish my dad were here to see it all. So in my mind, I saved things up for his next call. The judge sent my dad way upstate, and that's too far for us to visit, even if we had a car. We're always waiting for dad's calls. He knows we are. Keep up those A's and plays, he tells me. You have fun, but help your mama all you can. Before he's done, he says, don't you forget this now. I love you, son. The poem has not been published, but it did lead to the writing and publishing of my third picture book for children, Far Apart, Close in Heart, about children with parent in jail or prison. I am not a child with a parent in jail or prison, so I am writing someone else's story. But I believe that the book needed to be written, and I can share more about the process and the challenges of that manuscript if interested during the discussion. I do want to say that I didn't do it without a lot of trying to learn as much as I could about people's actual stories. And I don't know if you can see, the book has a page of references for anyone reading it who wants to get a more accurate picture than I could present. So who's writing whose stories? One easy answer to that question is Disney. We know that Disney is writing all of our stories. And this is just a quick aside into Disney princesses. Of course, I grew up with Disney princesses, and many of the children today have too. The first princess was Snow White in 1937, followed by Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and the first non-white princess was Middle Eastern Jasmine in 1992. Then we had Pocahontas, Native American, Mulan, who was Chinese, and finally, 72 years after Snow White, we had Tiana, an African American princess. And the only thing about Tiana is that the movie is called The Princess and the Frog, and Tiana spends most of the movie being a frog. So that's what we get when the mainstream tells our stories. I want to move on to something more contemporary and something nonfiction. A lot of my writing has been fiction, and not necessarily specifically Quaker, although I am a Quaker, so I guess that makes it Quaker writing. But I was reading recently, I've been reading Dancing with History. It's the autobiography by George Lakey. George Lakey is a member of my meeting, Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting, who I've known for years. So it was really a pleasure reading his book because I could sort of fit into it. Anyway, he writes about nonviolent activism. And I just want to read this one little part from what he writes. He talks about Martin Oppenheimer, who was another a sociology grad student who was as passionate as I was about activism, is what he says. And then he says, it was the 1960s, the civil rights movement. And Marty and I grew concerned that the movement had no way to adequately train the thousands of people who kept joining in from all over the country. When on April 7th, 1964, Reverend Bruce Clunder was killed while protesting the construction of a segregated school, Marty and I faced a sudden quandary. Clunder would probably still be alive if he'd gone into that situation knowing more about the tactics of direct action. Yes, a manual could convey that kind of information, and yes, the appropriate writer of such a manual would be a Black civil rights leader like Bayard Rustin, or an experienced member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
6 minutes.
Thank you. But the reality was that all the appropriate people we knew of were at capacity, organizing and coping with almost daily emergencies. How could they take the time required to write a manual? And so, of course, he and his other student friend, Marty, are the ones that end up writing the manual because they don't see how it's possible for anyone else to do it. However, he says, Bayard Rustin agreed to write the foreword. So we know from that that Bayard Rustin read the manual clearly before it was published and probably gave his feedback on it. The last scenario in my half minute or whatever I have that I just want to share is about Sojourner Truth. And Sojourner Truth was the women's rights activist and abolitionist African-American woman, famous for her speech on women's rights at the convention in Akron, Ohio in 1851. Many of us are familiar with Sojourner Truth's speech, and this is something that has been written about a little bit in an article in Friends Journal. I can share more details about that later. I was familiar with the speech as Ain't I a Woman, the Ain't I a Woman speech, and I knew from hearing it, reading it and hearing it, that it was written in almost exaggerated form of Black folk English, Southern African slave kind of dialect, and that it even included a racial slur. Research done by Princeton history professor Nell Irvin Painter has revealed that there is another version of Sojourner Truth's speech, and that it is written in a different kind of English because Sojourner Truth, actually, her first language was Dutch, and she grew up in the North. And when she learned English, it was with a Northern accent. What happened was that another, what is her name? I can't remember, a white woman decided to write a version of the speech that she remembered hearing. And she wrote it in a completely different voice from the voice in which it was given. We know this because another white writer happened to write and publish an article about the speech, also giving it in his words shortly after the speech was presented. Whereas the version that we all heard was not written until 12 years after the speech was presented. So what I want to say about this is that it's clear that, you know, the story was not written accurately by the white woman who wrote it. However, had she not written that, I don't know if I would even know who Sojourner Truth was, because that got so famous that we all learned about Sojourner Truth. So while we can regret the fact that we may be inadequate in writing the story, sometimes it matters that the story gets written even with flaws. I'll stop there. I know I'm over my time.
Becky, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. And Emma, you have the floor.
Hello, friends. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, it is a pleasure to be here, and really, I am happy to share a little bit about my experience as a Quaker writer. I would like to talk about my book, Quakers in Bolivia. This book has two different writings. The first part of the book is more like the history based on research, and the second part I have in that book is my memoir. So, and that book just became very interesting for me. When I decided to write this book, I had to think first in my readers, but second, I had to think about Bolivian Quakers, you know. So something very important for me has been to decide who's going to read the book, and really I wanted that this book can be read abroad, not Bolivians, but abroad. So even I wrote this book in English. So, but also I had to think about life, or the experience of Quakers abroad is completely different from the experience or life in Bolivia, So by the time I started writing this book, I already had a lot of experience living among Bolivians. Actually, I was raised as a Quaker, but also I had the opportunity to live in United States for 5 years. And also I had the opportunity to be exposed to other Quaker communities in other countries as well. So that has been very helpful for me to tell about a Bolivian Quaker experience in this book, and including the missionaries, U.S. missionaries experience in Bolivia. So when I was writing that section of history of early Quakers in Bolivia, it was very helpful to have other books like memoirs of missionaries or other authors who already wrote about Quakers in Bolivia. But definitely I could say, like, me as a writer, paying attention to whom this book is going to be addressed, and also valuing the importance of being in the context of the readers, but also have a lot of experience being in among Bolivian Quakers as well, was very helpful. So that was one of my experience. And about my memoir, in my memoir, I had to do a very deep description of others' experience, because in my memoir I included spiritual experience, for example, faith experience that is very hard to describe or to tell about others' experience about that to others, and especially in a different context. Again, my memoir, it was addressed so it can be read abroad, not in Bolivia. So, so I had to appeal to my own experience as well. That has been very helpful, me as a Quaker, and how that experience, spiritual experience, was seen in my own life since I was a child, and also my spiritual experience living abroad, and how also there was my experience, spiritual experience. So one thing I have to tell you, like, inner light, for example, inner light. Here in Bolivia, nobody understands, or they don't use the expression inner light. However, here in Bolivia, people speak about light, light. But abroad, for example, there is a lot of use of inner light. So there are those kind of little details to talk about when we are telling others a story. Like here, Bolivian friends talk about a teacher, the teacher that referring to Jesus Christ, and the Lord. But in United States, or among other friends in some other parts of in the world, they talk about inner teacher. So that has been also very interesting, how I can share about Bolivian Quaker experience, talking about that teacher, and the inner teacher. So Well, there have been many wonderful experiences as I have been writing about this, my own experience in my memoir. And I will finish with this. This is not a spiritual experience, but it's in my memoir also. I speak about my childhood swimming in the river. So, and I know that in United States, nobody can have a very kind an image of what does mean that Emma swimming in the river. So I had to appeal to other kind of understanding, like swimming pool, pool. Here in Bolivia, we don't have pools, but we have rivers, beautiful rivers, very clean and really gorgeous rivers where as when I was a child, I used to swim with my friends. And how I can tell that the story of my friends and me having that experience to the friends abroad. So I had to appeal to it was like the best swimming pool, I said. So I hope that have friends to imagine how am I enjoying the swimming, So thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That's beautiful. And before I open it up to the participants responding to the questions, this is the book you signed for me, I think in Glenthorne. And as I recall, this is you and this is your mother. Is that correct?
No,
That's
they are
you?
other family. Yeah.
Oh,
No.
it's a
But certainly my mom carried me in the back like that baby.
Okay, so you were carried like that. And it's a beautiful book.
Yes.
And maybe Liz, you can put how to obtain the copy later on. So here, that's my wife from Milton Keynes in England. She just finished a session in the course she and Tanya Hubbard are leading today at Milton Keynes Quaker meeting. Let me share the screen for the questions, and then we will. Okay, here are the 3 questions that the event organizers have asked us to consider. As Quaker writers, editors, publishers, reviewers, can we, should we, how do we tell someone else's story with integrity? How do we avoid cultural appropriation, insensitivity, and racist stereotype, and be respectful of others' experiences, culture, etc.? How do we recognize when our words might be harmful to a person of culture, race, or religion different than our own? You're welcome to pose other questions if time allows it, such to the theme, such as, can we truly write another person's story before knowing our own? And do we ever know our own? Totally. And second, does writing another story help us to learn more about our own? So the meeting is now open, friends. Stop the share. And I throw the floor open to you. Please raise your hand and I will call on you. And make sure that you recognize that. I think, Liz, when do we have to bring this to an end? 30 minutes from now?
We should try to bring it to an end. Maybe give ourselves another 5 minutes. Then.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
At 5 after the hour.
Thank you very much. So the floor is now open. Please raise your hand and allow me to call on you. To share on the 3 questions, on Emma, what Emma and Becky said, on the theme, or anything related.
I see Sabrina's hand. Daniel.
Okay, Sabrina, I was looking for the digital hand. Hi, Sabrina.
I was looking for the digital hand on my taskbar and I didn't see it, so I went with
okay.
the...
Let me. It's if you go down and click on reactions, then
Ah,
you get reactions, but down at the bottom it says
raise hand. All right, there we go.
You're in like Flynn.
All right. This session speaks to me because I'm currently writing a biography of a 19th century Quaker minister who was involved in a lot of, obviously, Civil War work. He was involved in the Contraband Relief Association for refugee slaves who were coming north. He was also serving on the Evangelical Committee of the Associated Executive Committee of Friends on Indian Affairs. And I know I'm going to have to address his life and work. I'm approaching it not as a 21st century historian looking back on it and commenting on it, but almost more of a literary nonfiction. So I present his perspective and those of his peers, some of which does not flatter Quakers. For example, I was just transcribing a letter that his wife wrote, and she mentioned Rebecca Allenson and Samuel Bettel held a meeting for colored people first day instead of appointing one, which neither had a right to do, not having a minute. They had our meeting deferred from 4 until 5 and had notice given to them to attend. What dost thou think of this way of mixing up? If this necessarily springs from true Christian charity, let us have it. But does our Heavenly Father intend us to mingle? Our relation to the colored people will be an important question, I think, and one which we will have to be ready to act upon. So you can see both an openness to interacting with Black people, but also a hesitancy there. And for me, the question of approaching this with integrity is being honest about their mixed feelings, yet I also want to be sensitive to how those kinds of reactions will be understood and received by the readers. I mentioned that he worked on the Committee for Indian Affairs. I know he was involved in White's Institute. I know that Quakers were certainly interested in assimilating and sharing the gospel with Native Americans. And again, I'm struggling with how to approach this. I know we're doing worship sharing, so I don't expect feedback, but I'm the only Sabrina Darnowski in the country. So if you want to friend me on Facebook or reach out to me in any other way, I would welcome hearing about the experiences of other writers who may have been doing similar kinds of work.
Thank you, Sabrina. Iris.
I am feeling really nourished and challenged by the presentations by Becky and Emma. And I'm still very much at the question about whether I'm the one to write someone else's story. And I took to heart Becky's examples of George Lakey and Sojourner's, the writing of Sojourner Truths or some form of her speech, and the benefit that those had, even though they had some shortcomings, and likely neither of those was as ideal as they might have been, had Bayard Rustin written the manual, or Sojourner Truth herself had, her exact words had been published. So to me, that is still a really big question. And where I think I am mostly right now is, given the possibilities that exist now for publishing, I've been putting more of my energy toward lifting up the voices of the people whose stories need to be told, and being a support in finding ways for them to tell those stories themselves, rather than for me to tell them. But I'm also open to, if I feel called to tell some untold stories that really need to be heard. I hope I will have the strength and the wisdom to respond to that. But right at the moment, I'm feeling more called to doing what I can to support people to tell their own stories.
Thank you, Iris. And you can, yeah, lower your hand. That's great. Maxine.
Hi. Yeah, I guess in a way, my solution to this has been a bit of a cop-out. As a lazy writer, it's always been easier for me to interview somebody than to write anything original. And I have an advantage that the people whose experiences that I'm trying to get out there are alive, or were when I had a chance to speak to them, and it's not historical. My, I guess, issue would come up with the editing. Generally, particularly early on, I would just encourage people to speak as long as they wanted, and you'd get an hour and a half interview, which took an awful lot of space on page. And so there's always extensive editing. So there's two aspects. One is cutting things down without changing the speaker's intent, and or changing how they appear to other people who are reading it, or to themselves if they're taking a look at it. And the other being feeling that I should correct grammatical errors when people were speaking in a language that was not their first language, or if I was doing the translating, putting it into quote unquote proper English. And I don't know how how okay that is or not, but it's a different problem, I guess. But I still like the idea of interviewing, letting people speak for themselves, and yeah. I guess another aspect of that was I used to do a lot of inviting speakers to come and speak and tell their own stories. So, yeah, that's a different way to go about it, I guess.
Thank you, Maxine. Liz.
I had a very interesting experience. I do personal history for people. In other words, I write basically their biographies, and it's been a real challenge. But the challenge that made me think that I could do this, at least with somebody who's alive, is that after doing one of from letters that of a diplomat, a 20th century diplomat, I was asked to do a personal history by an Air Force general. Being a Quaker, that was really a challenge. He had flown many sorties in Vietnam, which you know, really took me kind of by surprise. But his daughters really wanted to hear about his life, and he had never told them any of the stories about any of that. And he was dying of cancer, and so I went weekly for almost a year to his home, his home in a nursing home, and interviewed him, and put a book together for him that I'm quite proud of. We only produced a few copies for the family, but it was really an interesting experience to try to get into that very other person. Of course, it was just before the Trump election, and it was very much, he did not share my Quaker attitudes to people, although he was a very gentle and wonderful man who'd done some wonderful things after, both within the Air Force and out. So it was kind of an interesting challenge, and it makes me really think about, and he really felt that it was well written and really did reflect what he some of the hard parts of his life, as well as the good parts of his life. So anyway, I'm not sure I'd ever try that again, but it seemed to be a success. So
Thank you, Liz. Jessica.
Thank you, friend. Lower that hand. I'm researching the life of Daniel Drew, who was a Quaker who died 100 years ago this year. And he served in leadership roles in Arkansas for about 35 years, and then moved to Oregon, where I was raised, in his 60s. He was African American. He was enslaved when he was born and until he joined the Union Army. And he encountered Quakers as he was getting discharged from the Army. And to the best of my knowledge, he was the first recorded minister of African heritage. And I've been fascinated with his story ever since I heard about it, partly because I'm really interested in Black Oregon history, and moving to Oregon as an African-American family was a historically really unlikely and unusual thing to do in 1901. And he and two generations of his family did. As my writing partner who's on this call knows, I have done this project in fits and starts. On the page, I feel like what I'm trying to do is, use knowledge that and I'm not a scholar, use knowledge that I can glean from Black studies, from being around evangelical friends. I'm a liberal friend, I'm white, I'm lesbian. I'm also the descendant of missionaries, and Daniel Drew was a missionary in a sense. He was sort of anyway, it's complicated. The thing I want to share is that I haven't done as much of this as I would like to, but I think that consultation and collaboration off the page can be really important. And I'll use one quick example and then I'll stop. Daniel Drew moved to Oregon as someone who had been serving friends passionately for his entire adult life. And he pastored a little white meeting out in the countryside from 1901 to 1903, which just blows me away as an Oregonian. And he seems to have left Friends after about 6 years after he came to Oregon. And I'm not much of a researcher, but I also am not sure the material's there. I'm not sure I or anyone can figure out objectively why. But it's a heck of a conversation starter. And so I've on occasion had conversations with other Quakers of, why do you think he left? You know, was it theological? Were Oregon Quakers really weird compared to Arkansas Quakers? Was it racism? Was it white racism? Was there just a really fabulous church in Portland that he wanted to join and he was okay with that? And I've made contact with, I'm friends of friends with the person who pastors the descendant of the church that Daniel Drew pastored out in the country about 30 miles from where I am now. And we were threatening to get together, and then just things kind of fell apart. So today, among other things, renews my commitment. Hey, he's a white guy, to go talk with him because he's interested too. He's fascinated too. There's like this tiny little handful of us who are fascinated with the story. And the other thing is, I know that I have to get on the page my own fascination as a white, liberal, queer, 21st century Quaker, Oregonian. Like, why am I so hooked? And I need to show up with that. But all I've published so far is an encyclopedia article that doesn't go there at all. So, and Sabrina, I'm going to be reaching out to you, and friends, I would welcome anyone else who is, thank you, is doing this kind of project. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Liz, I'm sure that you'll provide a way for people to contact each other. Mhm. All right. So we've got L. Lotz from Haddonfield meeting in New Jersey.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for offering this program. I've been hearing about QUIP from Liz for a while, and glad to be able to join you. The topic today is very relevant because I'm trying to finish up a book based on oral history interviews with 9 Iraqis several years after Desert Storm, way back in '91. And as I circulated what I had hoped was a almost done draft, a number of people had said that I did not provide enough background to help people understand the history, the culture, the religion, all those things. And so I'm just curious how some of you may have done that. What I have come up with is also because people kept saying, you're only talking about the Iraqis, why the heck are you doing this? So my current solution is to have a preface that's a short piece about me and how I got into learning about Iraq. And then about a 10-page introduction that includes sort of setting the stage historically, a timeline, some maps, introducing 9 people because it's somewhat easy to get miscued on who's who as you're reading, and then some key terms. And the hope is by putting that in the beginning that will help people, since most folks don't know a lot of information about Iraq. So I'll put my name and my email address in the chat, and if you have any comments, I'd love to know that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. When I asked if Liz was going to provide email addresses, she said she would organize that. So that's the best one.
Actually, I don't have some of these addresses, so I would ask people to put it in the chat, and then I will have them. If everybody could just put their email in the chat. Some of you who are members of QUIP, we definitely have your address, but there are some of you who I don't think are on our membership list. Please do join QUIP. Thank you. It's very easy. You go to the webpage, QuakerQuip.com. You can join, and it will give you it will, you can join for whatever you
Yeah.
can
Thank
afford.
you. Thank you, Liz. And Finola O'Sullivan, as I
Yeah.
live and breathe, you're very welcome.
Yes, hello friends. I'm in Cambridge, England. I just two reflections wearing more my experience as an editor and not a writer. You should always check your sources, and if it's a living subject, you might run what you write by them. A very small example in my Quaker meeting is I've written some profiles of newcomers, attenders, or seasoned friends, or even a second profile at the 30 years later from the first one that we did. Actually, when someone dies, it could be helpful to look at the archive of profiles. And sometimes you get it wrong, So, I mean, I'm interested in maybe fictional biography is different, but, if it's a real living subject, you just be a good journalist and check your sources. But I also want to share with you, if that's okay, last Saturday evening here in England, I went to a play by a Quaker playwright called Michael Mears, Mears, and it's called The Mistake. And it's a dramatization of Hiroshima. And it's a dialogue between retelling a fictionalized account, I guess, of a survivor. And in later life, I asked him a question in the audience after it about what was the spark that made him write the play. And he said that he'd seen in a New York Times article in the early 2000s, an interview with the pilot of the Enola Gay, and also then a separate on the other page, a sort of transcript of an interview with the Japanese woman who had survived, with burns, but she survived. And he just thought, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful if in real life, she had the chance to ask him how he felt. So he wrote this play, and it's called The Mistake. But another amazing thing he just kept saying was the Quaker testimony to equality would be that you would show both sides of your story. You wouldn't just assume that your comfortable West, shoes, that you were walking the walk of the person you felt more comfortable with. And he came, like the Air Force story we've just heard, he came to see that the man who, had his right to his opinion, so which we're meant to be tolerant, aren't we, friends? But a final reflection he gave, which I thought was very interesting, was the movie this summer, which, I saw in Ireland where I was on my vacation, where I'm from, Oppenheimer. He just said, where is the Japanese story? It was just an American story. So context is everything, isn't it? Cultural context, your question, Daniel, about sometimes we don't know what glasses we're wearing. So anyway, thank you for a very interesting subject.
And I thank you, Finola. And yes, we have Donna from Berkeley, across the bay from where I was born.
Thank you. Good morning. I've been doing some writing about feminist Barbara Deming and peace activist, lesbian, and trying to come up with ways to tell the story of how I fell in love with this woman when she was already dead. And it's been a great 30 years of doing this research, and I'm finally to the point where I have decided that I'm doing a podcast about her story using research, original documents from the Swarthmore Peace Collection and Barbara's archive at Harvard. And I'm sort of struck by thinking about telling her story, and how that intertwines with my own story, and how to think about carrying forward this message of nonviolence, and how that has created a through line to activism today, and how do we keep these stories alive for people? How do we spark this kind of interest that was sparked for me when I just randomly found Barbara Deming because I had been doing prison research, and went, in the old days to the card catalog and was searching through the card catalog under P for prisons, and I found her book Prisons That Could Not Hold, and it opened up a world of for a whole different life for me, finding out about nonviolent activism, civil disobedience, women's movements, all sorts of changes happened over my life. And just trying to really think about how to tell her story in a contemporary way has been a challenge for me. And to do it honestly, and one of the blessings of her writing is that she didn't go back and edit her old writing to modern day standards. And so she, though living with a woman for many, many years out, to her friends, was not an out lesbian while in the 60s. And her writing and her poetry always reflected men, even though that was not her truth. And she never went back and changed it. And that ability for her to change over time has been fascinating for me. And so I'm kind of exploring the podcast option and what else goes with that. What other mechanisms do we have that involve writing that help tell these stories in compelling ways?
Thank you, Donna. We're running out of time. Perhaps I'll take this moment, Liz, to share my experience. And on a quick note, I've never attempted to write somebody else's story. In fact, for the past 8 years, I've been trying to help Quakers discover their own. I lead this workshop, which I was asked to do 20 years ago by a college professor in Belgium, and I developed into spiritual workshop, but I do it for Woodbrook Online. And I would just like to end, but I have done a lot of translations, mostly administrative for Médecins Sans Frontières, but sometimes heads of MSFs, the president of MSF in Brussels, translate their speeches from French into good English. And it's a 3-step process. I use DeepL Translate these days, but it's the word-to-word translation, the standing back to see if that's correct, and then the standing further back, a 3-step process. How would I say that if I were giving this first in English? And I'll tell my wife's story. She's up busy in Milton Keynes, England right now on conducting an anti-racism course, but I put a plug in for her Quaker Quicks book, A Simple Faith in a Complicated World. Kate McNally. Buy it, it's worth it. Liz, back to you. And this has been wonderful for me. I'm sorry we're running out of time. The shares have been absolutely wonderful.